Good morning. I'm Emily Young with NC Tech, and we're glad you could join us for this morning's Cybersecurity Network panel discussion on risk factors in today's environment. Just a quick few words of opening. We will be using the Q&A function for any questions, and Bill Dupree, our moderator, will let you know how that will go during the conversation. Big thank you to our Cyber Network panel, sponsors, sponsoring today's event and our other network events. You can see them here on the screen. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get our conversation started. I know we have a lot of great things to discuss today. I'll turn it over to Bill Dupree with Railing.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, yes, I am Bill Dupree. I'm Director of Security over at Railing here in Cary. I want to thank also our panelists who will introduce themselves in a moment, and thank all of you who have attended. Feel free to chat in the chat section, but also there's a Q&A section, so reserve any questions for that Q&A section, but feel free to ask questions. I want you guys to even possibly drive some of the content here. We've got some good things to be discussing around risk. You know, it's an important topic as security professionals. So feel free to start to chime in and ask your questions that you maybe want to kind of steer this conversation. And so I'll go around. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with Mardisha Bell. Mardisha, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Mardisha Bell, and I'm the CISO at NC State University, also the Director of Security and Compliance.
Thank you, Mardisha. James?
Hi, James Lamond. I'm technology architect focusing on security. So I run all of security architecture for Lamond. We're a telecommunications provider, you know, providing video, voice, and data services, technology services.
Thank you. And Devin?
Hi, I'm Devin Arendosh. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Bright House Financial in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I've only been with the company less than a year, so I'm new to the area and new to Bright House. Good to see everyone.
All right, thank you guys. So today we're talking about risk and kind of what the risk factors we're facing as organizations and as security professionals. And you know, I know many of us are probably have some COVID fatigue, but I think we have to kind of put that we're still dealing with it, right? And we're still dealing with it as organizations, as families, as security professionals. And so, you know, when the discussion goes today, we'll probably start off with some of that to kind of get us where we are today. But I think we also want to start looking at how we move forward, right? And start looking at some of the things, some of the other areas where kind of risk plays a part in our organization on a day-to-day basis. You know, when we dealt with COVID back 11 months ago, one of the things that helped, I think, at least my organization, I think helped other organizations was our investments in moving to the cloud, right? Many organizations were already there, you know, born in the cloud or already made their transformation. Other organizations had to do that pretty quickly, but I think it was an enabler for making that remote work succeed. But it brings risk. You know, it helped us with certain things, but also can bring risk. So we'll talk a little about that. I think we'd also be a bit remiss if we didn't kind of talk about one of the biggest security events that have occurred over the past several years that came out back in I think December now, that being SolarWinds, and what that highlighted around kind of the supply chain or third-party risk that we all have to deal with on a daily basis as we bring in, you know, as we go to the cloud and bring in more and more vendors. So there's that. And there's also, we can also talk about things like the regulatory environment that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and how that's going to change over the coming years, things like data privacy and so forth. So those are the different topics we can get into, but like I said, please feel free to ask questions and kind of drive the conversation to where you think it would be most valuable. So again, use that Q&A box that you have on WebEx. But first, I'll point the first question over at Mardisha. And like I said, let's talk a little about COVID to get us to where we are today. And Mardisha, I think working at NC State probably had a really unique challenge and had some unique set of risks there, not only to get employees, workers remote, but also have to deal with students who obviously want to learn remote. So over the past year, Mardisha, what risks did you have to cope with and deal with? And where are you right now and looking forward as, hopefully over the next year, you get people back onto the university?
Yes. So the biggest risk was transitioning to the remote teaching and learning for the faculty and the students. And the first risk that we had to deal with was Zoom, the security issues associated with that. So we worked with Zoom and with our partners across the campus, specifically our distance learning and education technology group, to work out the issues there. And then the big adjustment was, another big adjustment was remote working for employees. The adjustment to the video conferencing for meetings and the less human interaction. And by the employees working from home, the concern about the use of personal workstations to access the university data. So we had to put forth some best practices and guidelines for the use of the university data that you shouldn't be using or accessing or storing the sensitive data. And then the workflow processes was a big one. The electronics signatures and so forth, because everybody was used to, writing a document. We had some electronics signatures and workflow in place, but we quickly discovered that we didn't have enough. So we had to do that. So now it's been almost a year, folks are comfortable working remotely and doing the remote instruction. We did have to deal with a lot of attacks, phishing attacks. And so there was communication there. We are, as you all know, for the fall semester, we started off with bringing all the students on campus, and then about 2 weeks later, due to the increase in the COVID cases, we sent all the students home. We had about maybe 4,000 students remaining on campus. It was a small number there. So next week, they will be coming back. We have put in testing measures. Everybody needs to take a test. The housing has been rearranged such that it's a single occupancy on campus. We have a set of community standards that everybody has to abide with. For my security staff, we have pretty much been working remotely. We come on campus as needed. If there are some issues that we have that requires on-site, we do that. I'll stop there. I could go on.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean. I think we all had a long list of things. Let me maybe pass it on to maybe Devin or James. Add on to that. I know we all kind of had some of the similar challenges of getting people remote. We're dealing with Zoom and other things. But right now, are you still seeing some of that fallout? Are you still seeing some risks that are strictly because of COVID? And what are you seeing moving forward for your organizations? Things you expect to have to deal with over the next 6 months to a year?
The biggest thing that we have is we're doing a refresh of laptops and trying to figure out, do you mail all of these to everyone, or can we set up, like Best Buy and have you drive in and we put it in your trunk and you go on, because it gets rather expensive when you have to mail out all of these pieces of equipment to a separate individual. So that's one of the things we're working on right now, is how can we do zero touch and keep the persons safe that have to stand there and put the equipment in someone's trunk, and how willing are our employees to participate. So we're doing a pilot of about 70 people to find out, these are the dates and times that you can come by and pick up your laptop, and we'll put it in your trunk. And we'll see how many people say, I don't feel comfortable with that, and try to use that as a gauge. But that's an interesting thing when you have, a couple thousand laptops to give out. How do you do this? So that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, I can see that, because usually when you hand out laptops, it's not 1,000 at a time. Well, maybe some organizations do that. But James, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say we saw very similar, with corporations shifting from a work from home strategy. Echoed all the same things that you guys had as well. One of the things I'd say we saw a little bit different, being a service provider, we're having to provide the services for all of our customers coming in. So I'd say definitely over the last 6 to 9 months, where we saw a definite increase in services would definitely be from an internet bandwidth consumption. Definitely we saw corporations, starved for internet initially. Definitely what I'd say voice consumption, voice over IP and SIT services. We had an expansion of most corporations that had those services to what I call expand the amount of call pass or concurrent call pass to change the need of, I'd say, how the business shifted. And a lot of it had to do with what I'd say this work from home pandemic kind of hit us in the middle of what I'd say just a normal industry shift of customers moving from data center to cloud to different hybrid environments as well. So I think it kind of hit everybody all at once, and everyone kind of had to scramble as well.
Yeah, and one thing that I was actually listening to a podcast this morning, and the interviewer was talking to someone who was talking about data centers, or I'm not sorry, data centers, but call centers, and some of the unique challenges around call centers working remote. I don't know, James, if you've had this experience that you kind of provide services. Maybe I don't know if you probably have a call center yourself. Your company has a call center itself, but the challenge they had there was obviously PII. If a call center everybody is working outside of that call center, everybody working remotely. How do you control those, the operators, getting that personal data on their, their personal laptops? How do did you see that? Have you seen that with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say definitely from the shift of going from, like I said, traditional data centers to cloud environments. One of the things, as you alluded to, you basically have now a remote workforce, and now you have to get them the applications and what I'd say the tools that they need to work. So definitely we saw increase in that. That brings to mind what they call I'd say the new Gartner buzzword is zero trust networking, or ZTNA. So there's a number of different flavors that provide it, but ultimately what it does is it allows specific users the ability to real-time connect to the applications that they need and get what I'd call credentials, and then basically turn up and down those entitlements kind of real-time as you need them. So it's gotten away from what I'd say traditional security measures or metrics. It doesn't mean it's shifted it, it's just changed the way that things are now handled specifically from groups. Right,
and that's kind of handling some of this proliferation of cloud services. And I know zero trust is one of the big things they're doing now. And I know Gartner's also, they got this term called SASE, which is Secure Access Service Edge is another one they're pushing out there. But what challenges, what risks do you think that's helping mitigate, those technologies are helping mitigate?
Yeah, I'd say the endpoint mitigation, definitely you need something on what I call endpoints to monitor the end devices. From that, you need basically some type of logging or what I call SIM type correlation to track and see what's going on. Hey, this endpoint saw some malicious activity either being downloaded or propagated. Then you basically have like a SIM tool that can correlate all those data sources, see if it's happening to one device, multiple devices. Hey, I saw a bunch of encrypted files happening on this particular server, and then now I'm seeing data being moved to a different server. So definitely having what I call correlation type tools within the network that gives you the ability to kind of see what's going on, but then also combine that with what I call external threat feeds or threat intelligence sources that actually give you the ability to kind of compare that what's in your network to what's going on real time in the world, whether it's from different botnet C2 controllers, different phishing entities as well. So it just gives you what I call it an added layer of visibility.
Yep, definitely. And Mardecia and Devon, what, and you guys are experiencing kind of, I assume, going into the cloud as well, but what challenges or risks are you seeing as you kind of move more and more into the cloud? And I'm sure there's data issues, but what challenges are you seeing there?
So we are that we vendors with the cloud providers is not being able to do like security assessment to make sure that they have all the basic in place. So we have a process called IT purchase compliance, where we require all the purchases of the cloud vendors that meet a certain threshold. They have to come through OIT. There's a questionnaire they have to fill out and so forth, and we have to validate them.
Okay. Devin, your thoughts?
Well, we've had to step up quite a bit what it is that we require and ask of our third parties. As a matter of fact, we're going through a change right now of our managed service provider. And so it's a good time. It's a good time to be changing because it's very aware. And now we have multiple vendors while we're making this transition. So that helps a little bit. So we have a lot of eyes on everything. So apropos to us, thank goodness we're doing it now. So it worked out. But there are a lot of risks, understanding that you are able to see what's happening. And I think that's the main thing. I think in this time of external individuals, I think activity-based, monitoring and knowing what your users usually do is very helpful to see that something is out of whack, that something's happening that doesn't normally happen.
Right. Yep, definitely. That behavioral analytics and some of that stuff is actually, it's been, and I hate to say this, but all the vendors we talk to you about the AI they have in their system. Somewhat frustrating. I hate to hear that term a lot. But anyway, and this brings up that topic, as I mentioned before, around kind of SolarWinds. And, we could talk about that. Hopefully everyone's, heard about SolarWinds. I think that's the big security item that's occurred over the past few years, actually. It's something that looked like it started back in fall of 2019, actually, when the initial breach on the SolarWinds software at least initiated. And then obviously it got the SolarWinds deployed, the version got deployed back in about March of last year, I think was the time frame. And then for 6 months or longer, it kind of crept in there and impacted thousands of organizations with it. So and it calls out, and like you guys talked a little bit about it, but I think probably talking about a little bit more is the idea of, Mardecia, you talked about having your vendors, your security assessment and have some ability to understand their security posture. But what, maybe talk, if you guys, anyone, maybe I'll start with you, Devin, if you, when you, in the past, when you've had dealt with your supply chain, what risks have you seen with your supply chain, and what are you concerned about now? I mean, what are you concerned about going forward in light of what just happened?
I think that the main thing is ensuring that you have the least privilege that your vendor needs to do what they need to do. So I think that it goes back to making it very strategic, as in, if this vendor does X, Y, Z for you, that's all they can do, so that you ensure that they're not creeping anywhere else in your network or creeping anywhere else. And I think that, over time with the 4th generation firewalls, we've gotten better. We've gotten to where we can, ratchet it down to what we need, but it's definitely putting that layer of protection between you and them. I think what came out really stood out in my mind about this particular SolarWinds incident was that our incident response communication piece was lacking, because I had 5 board of directors to tell. I had New York to tell. I had Delaware to tell. Everyone I had to say of what we had done. We'd done a very good job. We had checked with all of our vendors. We had gotten the information, and we were doing, and kept checking with them and kept checking on if there was any problems. But we had, I know it must have been 50 different entities that I had to tell of what we did. And it was, I needed a better communications of, okay, we did this, now send it out to those 50 people. Then when the next update comes, you'll get your next update on X day, right? In 3 days or in 24 hours. And I think that's what we saw, is that our incident response communications process is not what it should be.
Yeah, and I could echo that too, because I know, my organization, I guess many organizations, not only do you have third party, you are a third party to somebody else, and you got to deal with the vendors that you're using, but you also have to give some assurances to your customers that, hey, you aren't impacted by this. And, and like you, I think there was a lot of kind of run around that, people calling and saying, are you impacted? Are you impacted? And having a good process to deal with that communication and that so it is an important aspect of an organization, right? And it's not a full-blown security incident, but it is technically almost a PR incident from that perspective. I don't know if James, you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, no, definitely the same. Well, definitely with the rise of what I'd say, just everything going on. The rise of what I'd say misconfigurations in general, definitely in cloud environments. That's where we're seeing a lot of breaches. One of the things additionally, kind of touching from that, I've definitely seen the need for what I call rise of the need for DLP or data loss prevention. So think of that as knowing what data you have in your network, and then what important data you have in your network. And then the next question that you really need to ask is, do you have a way to see if that data actually leaves your network, or is it roaming around? So what I'd say is the DLP type tools, file GPS type tools that can track your data internally, and then what I call put permissions on it. Because think about it, once data actually leaves your environment, you're basically giving the ownership to whoever sends it out. So at least if you've got some type of what I call DLP or file capabilities, you can either expire that file out after a day or a few weeks. You can set permissions on who gets to see it. Maybe it can't leave the U.S. or maybe even your state, or maybe even a certain people. So similar to how they do in digital rights management with some of the music and things, you can also do that with your different file types in your network. And DLPs can start at different ways. You can start with what I call file mining, and then as you start to classify your network and move up the stack, that's where it gets a little bit more intensive. But at least if you have what I call some of the basics just to see, but this can also extend into what I call firewalling strategies within your network. So you can set what I call hexadecimal values or different types of what I call pictures or graphics, inserting into your file types. And then from there, you can create a hash value. Think of that as a signature that your firewall can see. So if you see any of that file movement leaving or roaming around the network, you at least got some type of early warning indication of, hey, someone's somewhere where they're not supposed to be, or I've got files moving around the network that may not supposed to be. So let me just take action and see what's going on. So yeah, definitely what I'd say, the rise of DLP or needing a DLP strategy in the future.
Yeah, indeed, I think DLP. I know there's some challenges around DLP. I know yeah, with false positives on around how things are moving, but yeah, I think DLP is an important strategy. I know, Madisha, you have any thoughts on kind of your vendors and how you're going to think changes you may have to make going forward with your third-party vendors?
So we are just enhancing the process that we have in place. That's the main thing that we're doing. And I did just want to echo what James said, that it's very important that you have a inventory of your assets and that you know where your data lives.
Yep, that's definitely indeed. Let me bring up, we have a question in our chat here. And this is particularly around onboarding remote workers, but I think specifically kind of operational staff and technology staff. Any special procedures or monitoring undertaken for those staff? Any specialized, I guess. And the second part of this question: are there third-party supplemental resources, more dependable partner in the pandemic, or a more cautious partner? So again, around third parties, do you see third parties as more dependable or not? And also, how do you onboard in kind of technical professionals? I know, James, you may want to tackle that one first.
Yeah, definitely seeing the need for it. And I think Devin alluded to this earlier. There's a need for, pushing your supply chain to be a little bit more what I call secure, or having the ability to, validate who they are, where they are, what's going on. So yeah, I definitely see the rise of that. We're also, I'd say, the attack surface is definitely changing as well, and some of the need for the tools that were out there definitely have to increase. You kind of alluded to it, the ZTN, the Zero Trust Network. You're also combining that with the other one, what I call SASE strategy, and then a little piece of that, think of it as a CASB, so Cloud Access Broker. So you're starting to see, as applications move from being on site or on-prem or in a data center to either being moved to a hosting environment or a cloud environment, Azure, AWS, GCP, you basically have to not only make sure you've got everything configured correctly, but then also set up the right permissions to see who's getting in, getting out the right way, but then also checking the logs. What we're starting to see, especially from an incident response or forensic standpoint, when you're deep diving in after the fact, misconfigurations are definitely one of the main things that we're seeing. But then you're also seeing a rise of what I call just standard phishing attacks, or pointed phishing attacks. So the bad guys are definitely doing their intelligence, their reconnaissance, and they're getting what I call better at doing what I call targeted spear phishing, and then the links, everything's becoming what I call more realistic. So definitely they're upping the ante and changing their tactics.
Yeah, indeed, most definitely. We got to adjust to the attacker as well. I know, Devin, there's a question around onboarding on your technical professionals. Are there any unique things you're doing around that, or they're just whether it's an admin or a security professional? Are there any unique things you're doing to help onboard them, or that you have to do?
Well, we're using privileged access management tools to make sure that that you can, as you change individuals, that these service accounts and things like that, the password can be changed so that the information that's offboarding, but it goes along with onboarding and offboarding, and the fact that we're definitely set up so that the people we're a lot outsourced, and that they can't get directly to these servers, and that we can change quickly, because they they go through people rather quickly. So definitely using privileged access management is helping quite a bit.
Definitely. We do have another question here, and actually the question is a good segue into, I guess, another topic. And yeah, one of the things that, from a cloud perspective, that I was on a virtual seminar last year, and I forget who it was, but they talked about cloud security, and one of the panelists said it began with architecture and ended with automation. And that goes from automating that infrastructure within the cloud, but also from a perspective of kind of application deployments and so forth, right? And I know even on-prem, we had CI/CD pipelines, and obviously becoming more important in the cloud, and how you're from a cloud maturity perspective. And the question we have here, and I think we can kind of explore automation, DevOps, or what have you, but and the question here is about open source and response to the notifications coming from open source, and the push-pull process for deploying software and firmware patches. So, you know, my organization, I'll start and just kind of talk about my organization. As we, you know, matured as an application development organization, obviously CI/CD has become an important aspect of that. And making sure that the open source tools we're using are not adding risk to our applications. Obviously, there's a whole market for tools to help you determine whether you're bringing in vulnerable open source tools. And obviously, as we move into the cloud, as we do digital transformation, that automation has to continue, and you have to find ways to make sure we're not adding risk and putting risk into our own applications. But you know, Devin, maybe staying with you, I assume your organization probably, you know, as a financial institution, that you have application, homegrown applications that you guys are writing. Do you have an application security process to get insight into the open source things you're pulling into your organization? And maybe you would talk a little bit about kind of if you're using like for DevOps or automation, where are you in that area?
Well, it's very interesting because Bright House is a software as a service and 100% cloud. So we do not write much software. And being an insurance company, usually have 50-year-old, very mature, very legacy applications. We do not. So we're very lucky in that respect. But we still have to ensure that whoever we're getting it from has the appropriate controls in place. In my previous job, we did have the CI/CD pipeline, and we had that. We had the whole security built in rather than bolted on, so that everything as it was built and as it was going through the pipeline, it would be checked for viruses and checked. But in this, you know, new day and age with how sophisticated things are, that's something that I would worry about, whether or not it was up to the latest and greatest to find things. So that would be a worry for me. Unfortunately for me right now, we are not a big development shop, so that's good for us.
Yeah, gotcha. And you know, like I said, my organization, we are pretty much a development shop, and we have to make sure, obviously, that the things we're pulling into our applications are secure. And you know, there's tools out there, and you know, but it's really you know, embedding the security awareness within your application teams is to me the primary importance. I've had tools for years, but your application teams that just want to drive and get features done, right? It's the common issue with kind of development teams. That's what they want to do. That's what they need to do. That's what business is driving them to do. But I would say the technical debt that incurs is massive over years. And going back and having that process of going back and making sure if there's open source, that open source process that you're bringing in, you know, that you're updating the libraries and so forth over time. It is something that you have to have, and you have to build that into your process. Otherwise, the entropy of the open source, you know, packages you have in your code base it's just going to cause problems over time, as we've seen with many companies in the past that have application vulnerabilities that cause massive data breaches.
So do you have, and just that's a quick question from
Yep,
me,
sure.
do you have a security advocacy? Like, do you have your developers are certain ones that are your security advocates that make sure that all the security is in there.
Yes, and so personally, I have a application security engineer on my team that is kind of that advocate, but I tell him you can't be the only advocate, right? You have to find champions throughout the organization, and you have to find people who you can trust on the different teams who will take hold of this and drive it themselves, because my organization is still fairly small, so one person can be influential. It's still fairly hard, but it's more possible. But if you've got a large organization, thousands of employees, thousands of developers, it's not possible. That has to be built into the team, and it has to be something that is evangelized with the teams, and you have to have that. So, let's see, we have another question here in the chat. Maybe I'll pass this over to Mardicia again around virtual desktop interfaces. Did you guys exploit that? I mean, I know you said you talked about Zoom as kind of your primary kind of interaction. Were you using any VDI technology when you guys moved to when COVID hit?
Yes. We do have a virtual desktop environment that we utilize, and we have been working on that to make sure that that was secure previously. So we didn't have any major issues associated with that environment.
James, how about you? Did your organization exploit the VDI technology, and what risk were you seeing around that?
Definitely a VDI shop. Some of the risks mainly from a scaling standpoint, it was more just making sure the environments were secure, having what I call the right capacity, what I call just everything built the right way. And then one of the things, making sure everything honestly is just being patched up and set up the right way. Because if it's not patched up the right way, then you're definitely going to have the bad guys exploiting it. But yeah, we definitely saw a rise, what I'd say, in that. Being that we're a technology shop and we provide edge gear, what I'd say we saw a rise in what I'd say the edge companies expanding that. We have a large global footprint. So the goal, what we're starting to see is companies trying to get their applications closer to where, let's just say, the eyeball networks are or where the actual user lives. And what we're seeing, especially with what I call the combination of 5G, you're looking to get what I call the milliseconds of the application from what it traditionally is today. Now the new goals are going to be, 15, 10, and 5 milliseconds, depending on what type of application. So when you get specifically into what I call the 5G realm of, let's just say, a driverless car, you need to have between 5 to 10 milliseconds of latency between that car and, let's just say, the closest tower to kind of keep things going correctly. So yeah, definitely what I'd say edge computing and what I call virtual environments globally has been a huge rise.
And you bring up something I'd like to maybe explore, if you don't mind. You talked about 5G, and I know we're seeing that kind of the beginning of that transition, it seems like. And I know there are some risks around some vendors that are big vendors in that space internationally, and there are obviously some expected risks around that. So talk a bit more about that, Jane. Expand about what risk are you seeing from 5G that we should all be looking at over the coming probably years as it starts rolling out more and more.
Yeah, there's always risk with what I call any technology, but specifically when you're getting into 5G, you're definitely going to want to look for who the manufacturer is, what the equipment manufacturer is, where does the life cycle live, what kind of, let's say, chipsets do they use. You just want to make sure that you do some research, make sure what I call, after the SolarWinds, make sure there's no what I call backdoors or exploits into any of the chipsets. That's definitely been what I'd say a big issue with what I'd say the current 5G technology or some of what I call some of the overseas vendors. And then you want to make sure you can encrypt as much as you can. So not only you're encrypting what I call internal data channels, but everything you can encrypt as well. So let's just look at it from a network standpoint. A lot of people don't think about it with the rise of what I call fast Ethernet and Ethernet circuits, 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig circuits, what used to be what's called wavelengths or WDM. We're also starting to see the need for what I call encrypted wavelengths. So not only looking at what I call encrypted and what I call your standard, think of your SD-WAN type connection. So anything virtualized from a point-to-point instance or a VPN type network, that's going to be encrypted, but also what I call your endpoint or your big links, your 1 gigs, your 10 gigs, your 100 gigs, the large point-to-points, making sure those are what I call encrypted as well. And the technology's out there as well. The vendors now have that. That was kind of an issue probably, I'd say, going back the last previous 5 years. But we've definitely seen a rise in that, especially getting into, above 100 gig links. But specifically when you're getting into 5G, it's mainly about latency. So you've got the tower density. That's definitely the problem. They've got to upgrade the towers. But then behind the towers, basically, you've got to put large bandwidth circuits. So traditionally, let's just say when you were in the 3G realm, usually it had like a T1 or a 1.5 meg circuit. When you got into what I call the 4G realm, most of those had what I call 100 meg or fast-E, gig-E circuits behind it, and some of the high-end towers are going to have 10 gig circuits. When you're getting into the 5G realm, most everything's going to need to have 10 gig or multi-10 gig or some type of fast-E environment that can scale really quick, basically because of the bandwidth uses. But then that's where you also are going to see the rise for the latency aspect. So that's where you're going to start hearing edge computing getting between 5, 10, 15 milliseconds, to the actual networks. So depending on, let's just say, I'll pick on Palo Alto Prisma. So they're one of the large VPN accesses out there. They do some zero trust. They also have what I call some software-defined gateways. They're one of the competitors that are touting, hey, we'll get you within 15 milliseconds of compute using our actual data center. So that's an example of when you can actually get to the cloud, you can leverage what I call the hyperscale networks that the cloud providers have built. And that gets you a little bit what I call faster milliseconds of compute than what you would traditionally have, what I'd say, in an on-site environment, mainly because you would have to basically pay to have that capacity there by either 1, 2, or multiple carriers, but then also have to have all the equipment there to stand it up, get it up and ready as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a massive, obviously, infrastructure change with risk that entails. And you mentioned edge computing and all the things, I guess, with IoT, all the risk around with IoT will bring when you've got and all aspects of that with the risk that we see around IoT with the vendors and the concerns we have around that. And that may drive us into another area around regulation, obviously, because I think IoT, as we've seen, there are some governments are looking to regulate more with IoT. So as those get proliferated, we may see some stuff there. But before we go into stuff like that, there was another question. I don't know if anyone wants to take on this one, but does anyone want to talk about the government's response to SolarWinds? Does any thoughts on what the government done or talked about doing? Any concerns around kind of how government was hit there? Anybody wants to tackle that one? No one? Yeah, I sat in on some calls with CISA, which is a cyber security, infrastructure security administration, and they've talked about that, and they are really, obviously they've told departments in the federal government at least to cease using the SolarWinds, the NMS tool that SolarWinds provided. That was the issue. I think they stopped, completely stopped them from using that stuff. Obviously, that's going to change. It has to change because obviously SolarWinds was a leader with the Fortune 5, company that provided Fortune 500 companies with network monitoring tools. So obviously that's something that you can't live without for an extended period of time. And they were providing guidance to various industries around what they should be doing, what different companies should be doing if they were exposed to the SolarWinds issue. So I think they're doing the right thing. Like I said, CISA has been very helpful in providing guidance, not only to the government but to private industry. Now, the argument goes to why did they find out this earlier, right? Why did it take 6 months or longer for this to come out? And also the question of why would it take FireEye to be the ones who expose all this, even though FireEye itself was hit by it. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussions around, why it took so long for that to be discovered. And as we learn more about how sophisticated this attack was, and I guess the parties behind this, and we think we have some contribution on that as well. So it'll be interesting over the next several months as this unfolds more and more, and we learn more and more about how this happened. And that's why I'm saying that from our perspective, security professionals, that supply chain risk is going to be a front and center for probably the next several months as we talk more about this. So, and like I said, maybe that gets us into this next area of risk. And as I mentioned earlier about kind of the regulatory landscape and environment that is going to be changing over the coming years. We were dealing with data privacy laws, obviously, and we can loop this back with COVID too. Does anyone see any potential changes to regulatory environment with respect to COVID? People work from home. Are there things around that? Around there, or just in general, what regulatory issues are you concerned about? And maybe I'll start with Devin again, since you're at a financial institution. I'm sure you're under lots of regulatory pressure. Are you seeing risk from regulatory changes coming up over the next year or so?
I think that they're still on the privacy right now, and I think that's going to be, each state following suit of what New York did. Now we see Delaware's come out with it, won't be long before Nevada, all the different ones are going to come out with, and California came out with one. So I think right now, because of the time that it takes them to get regulation out, that we'll still be dealing with privacy for a while. I think that maybe amendments may come about monitoring. And I think that may be something of where do you have somebody watching your network at all times? I really think that's going to come, because they just changed it to where are you keeping the logs so that you can go back if someone was in your network, a year ago. Can you make sure that you can go see what they did? I think the next thing will be, do you know if there's anything going on in your network?
And Modisha, what about you? I mean, in the academic institution, are you seeing any special regulation or even just rules within academia that you're worried about?
Yes, there's the federal government has increased the use of the NIST 800-171, and they are in the process of coming out with the CMMC, the Cyber Security Maturity Model certification. So that's definitely on our radar, making sure that we do a lot of research, of course, because we are a research university. So we have to make sure that we are in compliance with that. And with this CMMC, they are no longer going to allow you to do the self-assessment. They are going to make sure that you are meeting all of the requirements and so forth. And we're starting to see that with the GLBA, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act coming down with the financial institutions. They're going to start using the NIST 800-171.
Right. In that CMMC, I'm starting to see that as well. My organization is not, kind of regulated there, but we do deal with some federal government aspects, and yeah, that could be something from a, it's a risk, obviously, because that's something a change in your organization that you may have to deal with, and tightening up some aspects of, to meet that maturity model. So I know we got a few minutes left, and maybe I just want to go around the table here, so to speak, and just ask each of you over the next year or so, what are some of the risks and challenges that you expect to see? I know we talked about some of them, but what's your top concern over the next year, that risk that you're seeing? Maybe we'll start with Madisha, since you're here. I think we talked about you last. So what are your big risks you're looking at, big challenges you're seeing for the next year?
I think the biggest risk is knowing where our data is. We do have a project to work on that, to make sure we do a comprehensive inventory, and we are working on the data classification. We're enhancing that. Another big risk is the compliance area with that. And we have started a risk process where we are categorizing, prioritizing the risks. So from a efforts standpoint, we want to focus on the highest risks. So right now, those are the top ones: enhancing the vendor risk process that we have, so that we feel more confident about the vendors that we deal with and their security posture.
Great, thank you. James, how about yourself? How about your organization? What risk are you kind of anticipating for the next year or so?
Yeah, some of the things, definitely what we're seeing that we anticipate, what I'd say, give it a top 5 things. Vulnerability, patch management, that's going to be one of what I call the hot items. If someone's not patching your network, someone else is, meaning if you find devices that are patched up to the nines and you didn't do it, you might have a bad guy in there. Traditionally, a hacker, once he gets in, he's going to patch up your environment so a bad guy doesn't actually knock him out. So stay on top of vulnerability management, patch management. I know it's what I call weird work, or the different environments, have different postures with it. But yeah, definitely try to stay up on patching as much as you can, and then having some type of what I call vulnerability management tool that can kind of track where you are from a progress standpoint. We can evaluate the network today, and then as you're patching, it actually gives you, let's just say, a risk score. What's your risk on your environment? And then also it can cross-correlate it to what I call RCEs, or remote code executables, that are live on the web. So what is the most critical things that are going on the web, and is anything in my environment able to exploit that? So as long as you get what I call the top things off the network, that takes your attack surface down a little bit. What I'd say, with the rise of the different cloud environments, hybridized environments, and especially when you're getting into what I call applications, DevOps, SecOps, and application security, web application firewalls, or WAFs. They've made there's a lot of different vendors out there that have come a long way from what I call your traditional WAFs, but definitely employ that security on your applications. Even what I call some of what I call your DevOps ones, or some of the ones that may not be as critical. What we're starting to see is bad guys getting into those environments and actually kind of creating havoc on the back end as well. So definitely a web application firewall, some type of endpoint monitoring or endpoint security that combines with what I call, as Devin alluded, the logs, making sure you have a logging strategy. Traditionally, depending on your environment, at least 90 days. Most corporations are now going to start being tasked with having at least a year's worth of logs. Some environments need 1, 3, 5, or 7 years, depending on the regulatory risk. But then not only having the logs is good, that goes back from a forensic, but some type of what I call tool that can correlate those logs for you, can kind of quickly tell you what you're looking for, because ultimately the log, you're looking for a needle in the haystack. So you need some type of SIM tool or something that can quickly correlate that data. And then kind of one of the other things I alluded to is some type of DLP strategy. It doesn't even have to be a full-blown DLP, but what I call a DLP strategy that just has what's called like file mines, that has the ability to, let's just say, track your critical data until you can get ahead on the bigger strategy itself. And then kind of we alluded to what I call the different frameworks, the NIST 800 to 171, 853 is another one, NIST CSF is another one. So if you don't have a framework, any one of those three kind of get you to what I call the basics. NIST CSF is kind of the new common one right now that basically gets you what I'd say 98% there, depending on your regulation. If you need PCI, HIPAA, or something else, you might have to add on some additional controls, but from the most part, it'll get you what I'd say 80 to 90% of where you need to be.
Great, thank you. Good advice there. And Devin, close us out. What are the big risks you're looking at over the next year?
I think that the main thing is you have to know what you have, and you have to know how your users act, because it's going to happen. Everybody's having ransomware. Somebody's going to get in. How quickly can you find out whether or not someone has or hasn't been in? And I think that that's going to be your main, if you're going to be very, very successful, you know what's going on in your network and you know what your users do.
Great, good advice from all of you. That brings up on time. I'll turn this over to Emily, but I want to thank everybody, thank our panelists. Very good discussion. I appreciate all your input, all your discussion. I appreciate the questions from our audience here, and hopefully this was a fruitful discussion for everybody. Emily?
Thank you so much to the panel, and Bill and Mardisha, Devin and James. I know I sit here and learn something every single time I hear from you all. So we really appreciate your participation. Our sponsors are here on the screen. Thank you. Big thank you to Lamond, our presenting sponsor of the Cybersecurity Network, and our supporting sponsors. I saved the questions. I know there might have been a few we couldn't get to, and I'd like to put those in our member virtual community called NC Tech Connect, and maybe we can continue to the discussion there, post some thoughts there. So I'll make those available. And the recording will be sent to everyone if you'd like to re-listen and share with your networks as well. Just wanted to bring to your attention our Outlook for Tech event is less than 2 weeks away now. So if you want to have any questions about that, we'll be talking more about what's to come in this 2021 year. So thank you, everyone. And I will follow up with everyone hopefully later this afternoon. Thank you and have a great day.